Buddhist spiritual teachers, how do Buddhist spiritual teachings and practices inspire activity in the world? How are Buddhists today putting their faith into action? Nowadays, meditation and mindfulness are getting a lot of scientific attention that is regularly mentioned in the news. The Dalai Lama has long encouraged these studies, which point to the value of meditation both on and off the cushion, or on and off the seiza bench or chair, whatever you use. The Dalai Lama's encouragement is not surprising, where the primary source for most of these practices is Buddhism, whether the fact is acknowledged or not. In fact, Buddhism has long been identified with meditation. The most common symbol of Buddhism is the seated Buddha, especially the Buddha seated in meditation. So, is Buddhism only about meditation? The shortest answer to this question is no. However, meditation is a core Buddhist practice. So the question is, why is meditation so important in Buddhism? As Professor Stephen Prothero says in his book, God is Not One, every major religion focuses on a spiritual problem, proposes a solution to that problem, and provides a technique and offers one or more exemplars. For example, in Christianity, the problem is sin, the solution is salvation, the technique is faith and good works, and the exemplars are Jesus, saints, and ordinary people of faith. In Taoism, the problem is lifelessness. The solution is flourishing. Buddhism, the problem is suffering. The solution or goal is nirvana. The technique is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the exemplars are arahants, bodhisattvas, Zen masters, and lamas. In Islam, the problem is pride. The solution is submission to Allah. In Judaism, the problem is exile. The solution is return to God, etc. Of course, the nature of the problem conditions the solution. So it is that suffering, that is the spiritual problem for Buddhism, is the fact of suffering. Now, I want to be clear, suffering is psychological, but pain is physical. If I do not identify with the pain, if I do not cling to it as mine, I really will not suffer from it. Buddhism's solution to the problem of suffering is transforming pain into what Buddhist teacher and activist Thich Nhat Hanh called peace, joy, and liberation. And this comes from disidentification, not identifying with the problem. Now, the Buddha summarized this central problem of suffering and its solution in his very first discourse after his awakening. He called the summary the Four Noble Truths. To eliminate suffering, one must first acknowledge suffering exists, that it arises from causes and conditions, greed, hatred, delusion, and the misperception of a stable, unchanging, permanent self and immutable soul. 3, that suffering can be transformed into peace, joy, and liberation. And 4, that there is a specific, effective way to do this. As you may have noticed, the Four Noble Truths have the form of a medical model: diagnosis, etiology, prognosis, and prescription, or treatment or therapy, medicine. The Buddha called this prescription the Noble Eightfold Path, which is a set of interrelated practices: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Note that these are practices, things that one does, not things to believe, not articles of faith to accept, not a creed to confess. The Buddha's teaching is profoundly pragmatic and experiential. After all, if you are given medicine, you have to take it to get well. Just reading the label on the bottle won't get you very far. At the heart of the Buddhist prescriptive path is the transformation of the mind-heart, and that takes doing, practice. A note on language, the Buddha used the term chitta, which is both Pali and Sanskrit, which can be translated as either mind or heart. For chitta refers to the combination of thought and feeling, a combination of cognition and affect. The Chinese say xin, the Japanese say shin, the Koreans say shim. All three of these East Asian words mean the mind-heart combination, which is something to keep in mind because most translators use one term or the other, which doesn't give a full picture. So this transformation is why formal meditation and general mindfulness are core practices. They get to the deep source, the vortex of real change, of transformation, of uprooting greed, hatred, and delusion, of dissolving the misperception of self, and of ridding ourselves of greed, aversion, and delusion, and opening ourselves to the flow of life. From the Buddhist perspective, our ordinary, everyday state of consciousness, in the words of meditation teacher Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, quote, is seen as being severely limited and limiting, resembling in many respects an extended dream rather than wakefulness, unquote. We actually miss much of our life. Dr. Kabat-Zinn again, meditation helps us wake up from the sleep of automaticity and unconsciousness, unquote. That is, we tend to live in a conceptual and emotional fog, and meditation lifts that fog to open us to bright, sunlit clarity of the immediate present, which is really the only really real thing. It's really real, that's it. The Buddhist expression of this is to see phenomena, including ourselves, as they are without conceptual overlay, without ulterior motives, without emotional coloring, without our usual incessant self-reference. This is called, in translation into English, thusness or suchness. The Pali word is yatha Buddha, yatha Buddha, suchness or thusness. There are many specific meditation practices. The most common of these nowadays are the cultivation of the jhanas or dhyanas, absorptions, development of insight, vipassana, Zen koans or huadu, Zen silent illumination, mochao, or just sitting, shikantaza, and the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion, cultivation of the head and heart together. Many Buddhists use chanting as a practice. The cultivation of experiential insight wisdom is fundamental. For, as the Dalai Lama says, quote, how we see the world determines our responses and behavior, unquote. The transformation of our mind-heart requires clear vision of ourselves and the world. Now, in insight practice, we develop enough concentration to be able to impartially observe the arising and passing of sensations, thoughts, and feelings. We see how they are caused and conditioned, and how they cause and conditioned more sensations, thoughts, and feelings. In seeing the arising and passing of these sensations, thoughts, and feelings, we see that our very sense of self is, in fact, a mental construct. It is not that there is no self. That's a misperception of Buddhist teaching, a common misunderstanding of Buddhist teaching. but the self is conditioned, impermanent, dynamic. It is empty. Maybe you can think of it as a flowing stream. Not only is it a mental construct, it is even a psychosocial construct, according to Zen teacher David Loy. That is, our fabrication of our own sense of self involves interaction with others. So our sense of a separate self in here or here is at the same time the construction of an other out there. And we're constantly reacting, relating to how that other out there sees us in here. That other out there is that which is different from us. So our construction of this self involves feedback loops. We come to experientially understand how divisions between oneself and others arise because we've got this idea of ourself and others out there. We think maybe there's a separation there. So we see how the divisions between oneself and others arise, as well as all of the toxic problems from these divisions. Conflict, anger, resentment, racism, tribalism, and so much more. With these insights, we come to see that the sharp distinction we make between ourself and others is an exaggeration, if not a fiction, and one that generates suffering. We realize that we exist in relation to others, that reality is relational through and through. That in Thich Nhat Hanh's words, we inter-are with everyone and everything else. In short, an independently existing object or being can never be found. Nothing and no one exists in isolation. Thich Nhat Hanh calls this, as you know, interbeing, which is a deep understanding of the interdependent web of all existence. Different terms can be used. For example, interdependence, interbeing, interpenetration, to indicate the relationship or the relational nature of reality. In the East Asian tradition of the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Huayan Qing, there's the net of Indra. Nothing exists alone. What exists are relationships within us and between us and others. Note that such formal meditation practice based on sufficient concentration eventually dissolves the sense of self-centeredness. Another way of putting it is that sense of self-centeredness simply drops away. That self-centeredness that is the narcissistic, self-absorbed self, with its incessant self-reference of most ordinary consciousness. This removes the basis for discriminating against others as the other and sensitizes us to the needs of others. In the words of the Dalai Lama, quote, due to the fundamental interconnectedness which lies at the heart of reality, your interest is also my interest, unquote. With the development of this experiential insight wisdom, our practice is strengthening loving kindness and compassion towards others. And this insight, loving kindness and compassion, are supported by Buddhist practices of generosity and patience. Here we have the links between meditation on the cushion and action off the cushion. Excuse me. And off the cushion, we can strengthen our awareness through mindful practices in daily life, such as those I've mentioned in previous talks, or again, promoting mindfulness on the go by Jan Chosen Bays. You can use it all over the place. At this point, it is important to note one thing mentioned by Professor Sally B. King when discussing Thich Nhat Hanh. And here we go. She says, one has to be able to see the value of this world. Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't speak of this world as a trap from which we try to escape. He makes it clear that where things go wrong for us is not so much the world per se, it is with us. It is with us. Our greed, hatred and ignorance, our clinging, fear and delusion. One need not negate the world and human life within it in order to progress on the Buddhist path. As humanistic Buddhists, like the Venerable Yin-Shun, who is one of Thay's inspirations, emphasize all Buddhas gain enlightenment as human beings. This world is where we practice. Our everyday life is the practice place. Waking up, taking the first step of the day, using the toilet, washing your hands, getting dressed, looking at your hand, contemplating your food, washing the dishes, walking meditation, throwing out the garbage, driving the car. In Thay's hands, all these mundane things become gateways to the transmundane. As a layperson, with a rich life full of perhaps a spouse or partner, children, job, responsibilities, friends, family, community, dogs and cats, one need not try to take time out of life for practice. That probably does not exist if one has young children. One can practice moment by moment in ordinary, everyday life, in daily life, the practice place. As one of the most important popularizers of mindfulness, practice in daily life, it is important to note that Thay was not at all sympathetic to what some critically call McMindfulness. I've spoken about that before. The appropriating of mindfulness for the purposes of the ego or corporations. You may notice in some of the news and in some of the research, there's a lot of corporate mindfulness going on. Thay always emphasized that mindfulness is a way of life rather than a tool or a means to an end. For Thay, mindfulness has entered being with the entire project. A case in point is the 5 mindfulness trainings. Thay's socially engaged form of the traditional 5 lay precepts, which are the moral foundation of the Buddhist layman's path, Thay strongly encouraged everyone to embrace this practice, to practice his 5 mindfulness trainings. For Thay, these practices are based on mindfulness. He wrote in his introduction to the practices, which you can find in many, many locations, the 5 mindfulness trainings are based on the precepts developed during the time of the Buddha to be the foundation of practice for the entire lay practice community. I have translated these precepts for modern times because mindfulness is the foundation of each one of them. With mindfulness, we are aware of what is going on in our bodies, our feelings, our minds, and the world. And we avoid doing harm to ourselves and others. Mindfulness protects us and our families and our society. When we are mindful, we can see that by refraining from doing one thing, we can prevent another thing from happening. We arrive at our own unique insight. It is not something imposed on us by an outside authority. Thay's teaching of mindfulness is clearly the opposite of mindfulness. Here one must take upon oneself the responsibility to look mindfully at all things on the basis of one's understanding and compassion, take action, accepting that one may need to make changes in oneself or in one's society on the basis of what one mindfully sees. Thus, in his hands, the traditional first precept, not to kill, becomes the following: aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning always to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn comes from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world, unquote. You see how Thay puts a positive cast to what is normally expressed in a negative way. The other precepts are all similarly grounded in mindfulness and expanded. Thay's mindfulness cannot be separated from his engaged Buddhism, end quote. And to mention Thomas Merton one more time, when it comes to activism or helping others, the famous Cistercian monk Thomas Merton wrote about the value of meditation or contemplation this way. He said, quote, a certain depth of disciplined experience is a necessary ground for fruitful action. Without a more profound human understanding, derived from exploration of the inner ground of human existence, love will tend to be superficial and deceptive. Traditionally, the ideas of prayer, meditation, and contemplation have been associated with this deepening of one's personal life and this expansion of the capacity to understand and serve others. Scholar monk and Buddhist Global Relief founder, Bhikkhu Bodhi, good old Bhikkhu Bodhi, agrees with Merton and says, quote, true compassion must be expressed in socially transformative action. If we fight for social justice without an effort to cultivate inner peace, our action can be driven by the same kind of destructive anger we are trying to overcome out in the world. It's a very important point. If there is simply a quest for inner peace without concern for social action, we can easily slip into a narcissistic concern with our inner well-being at the expense of the call for compassionate engagement with the wider social context in which our own life is nested. But when the two are joined, inner balance of mind serves as a platform for developing clear insight into the causes of our predicaments and into practical strategies that can promote effective solutions, unquote. To Thay, excuse me again, to Thay, Merton, and Bodhi, I want to add, it's in our engagement with the world that the true strength of our inner well-being and transformation is experienced, tested, and witnessed. In other words, the strength of our transformation can be seen in how we respond and act in the world. A spirituality that cannot express itself in the world is fragile and tenuous. As the prominent American Theravada monk Ajahn Sumedho once told me many decades ago, quote, "If my practice doesn't help me while I'm walking down the street in Bangkok, what good is it?" Unquote. Our test of on the cushion practice is often off the cushion. I've been talking about meditation and mindfulness from the Buddhist perspective. However, does it really work? The many recent scientific studies of meditation and mindfulness indicate it does work. And what is interesting is that many of these studies focus on meditation's benefits off the cushion. I'll report on only one. A recent study by Northeastern University's David DeSteno, published in Psychological Science, took a look at what impacts meditation had on interpersonal harmony and compassion. In this study, a team of researchers from Northeastern University and Harvard University examined the effects of meditation that would have on compassion and virtuous behavior. And the results were fascinating. The research team wanted to know whether the subjects who took part in the meditation class would be more likely to come to the aid of a person in pain, even in the face of everyone else ignoring her. They knew meditation improved a person's own physical and psychological well-being, and they wanted to know whether it actually increases compassionate behavior. Among the non-meditating participants, only about 15% of people acted to help. But among the participants who were in the meditation sessions, 50% helped. The truly surprising aspect of this finding was that meditation made people willing to act virtuously, to help another who was suffering, even in the face of a norm not to do so. These results appear to prove what Buddhist teachers have long believed, that meditation is supposed to lead you to experience more compassion and love for all sentient beings. But even for non-Buddhists, the findings offer scientific proof for meditation techniques that alter the calculus of the moral mind. I will close with just a few of the many examples of what Buddhists are doing off the cushion. For example, Buddhist activism and socially engaged Buddhism, or just engaged Buddhism, is one example that I've mentioned for 3 days now. First, the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh have provided inspiration and compassionate and non-violent action. Thich Nhat Hanh's work in the war-torn Vietnam and after has been an enduring example of engaged Buddhism and inspiration to others. The Buddhist Peace Fellowship was founded in 1978 in Hawaii and is now headquartered in Berkeley, California. Roshi Bernie Glassman founded the Zen Peacemaker Order. Roshi Joan Halifax is now leading the order. Prison Dharma Network, this non-sectarian Buddhist organization, developed meditation and mindfulness-based work in jails, prisons, juvenile facilities, post-release, and at-risk youth organizations. The network sends thousands of meditation books to prisoners and prison libraries each year. It has a membership of over 175 organizations and over 4,000 individual volunteers and supporters. In the past several years, the network has trained over 200 volunteers in its Path to Freedom program. The Tzu Chi Foundation, founded in Taiwan in 1966 by the extraordinary Buddhist nun, Chung Yun, the foundation has a broad range of programs and is especially effective and respected in its disaster relief work. And of course, Buddhist global relief. In 2007, the American Buddhist scholar monk, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, whom most of us know, wrote an essay about social action for a Buddhist magazine. This essay inspired several of Venerable Bodhi's students to join him to form a Buddhist relief organization dedicated to alleviating the problem of global hunger and malnutrition, especially supporting local efforts by those in developing countries and to achieve self-sufficiency through improved food productivity. Contacts were made with leaders and members of other Buddhist communities in the larger New York area, and Buddhist global relief emerged with a mission to combat chronic hunger and malnutrition. Bearing in mind the Buddhist statements that, quote, hunger is the worst kind of illness, unquote, and, quote, the gift of food is the gift of life, unquote, BGR sponsors projects that promote providing direct food aid to people afflicted by hunger and malnutrition, helping develop better long-term methods of sustainable food production and management appropriate to the cultures and traditions of the beneficiaries, promoting the education of girls and women so essential in the struggle against poverty and malnutrition, giving women an opportunity to start right livelihood projects to support their families. Buddhist global relief seeks to raise awareness of global hunger and advocate an international food system that exemplifies social justice and conduces to ecological sustainability. And nowadays, they're really important to Sri Lanka, which is going through a terrible, terrible situation and increased poverty. In sum, there are now many Buddhist groups doing extraordinary work. The members are dedicated to the practice of meditation and working for social justice. The practice on the cushion doesn't just stay on the cushion. It is part of how we live conscientiously, intentionally. As a formal practice and daily mindfulness grow, they merge into a unified whole of practice, the whole cloth. I close now with a quote from the Dalai Lama. Quote, true compassion and love in the context of training of the mind is based on the simple recognition that others, just like myself, naturally aspire to be happy and to overcome suffering, and that others, just like myself, have the natural right to fulfill that basic aspiration. The empathy you develop toward a person based on recognition of this fact is universal compassion. There is no element of prejudice, no element of discrimination. This compassion is able to be extended to all sentient beings so long as they are capable of experiencing pain and happiness. So you have time for Q&A. Are you awake?
Yes.
Yes, it was wonderful, Michael. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful lecture.
Yeah,
Well,
we get this
the
kind of
models are wonderful
encouragement.
people.
We need to somebody remind us.
Yes, it's so good to hear voice saying, instead of reading all this all along, it's good to hear human voice saying things that you really agree. It's a good feeling. Thank you.
It's really important.
Yes, absolutely.
Not just what we do on the cushion, because that's also important, but also, as Bhikkhu Bodhi noted, that sometimes the meditation on loving kindness and compassion, if it doesn't result in physical expression and activity in our lives, can become this kind of narcissistic little practice where you feel as though you're doing good things, and good thoughts are very important. But if you don't act on that, it doesn't have much power, and it doesn't go where the Buddha intended it to go, as we understand him.
So I have a
A
question
lot
for
to do
you.
with the development of Mahayana.
You had mentioned repeatedly that Thai's perspective was shaped by war, by the conflict that he lived in while in Vietnam and elsewhere. Did he speak to the legitimacy of defending yourself, your culture, your community in the face of an adversary, an enemy who is not inclined to see the path as we do? Or are you supposed to absorb aggression and pay the consequences?
The Buddhist responses to that have been many and on all sides. The problem also depends on who your adversary is. For example, right now in Ukraine, the people are suffering from a 19th century version of imperialism out of Russia. And you need to defend as best you can. They're trying to get talks going, but they're not going anywhere. So they, in some sense, have no choice. You will find that in almost all Buddhist cultures, that if there is an offense, there will be a defense. And to be honest about it, in Korea and Japan, you have had monks doing the fighting. And during the Vietnam War and the troubles in Cambodia that brought down the Cambodian government of Sihanouk, you had monks running weapons from Thailand, from the refugee camps, into Cambodia and Vietnam. I don't have an answer for that. If I did, I would have 6 Nobel Peace Prizes. But it is this is the challenge. This is the major challenge to nonviolence. There are some who take a different point of view. It's a particular interpretation of the Bodhisattva vow. And that is, sometimes to be a Bodhisattva, you take on a negative karma, harmful karma, to achieve a greater end. In other words, sometimes you have to willingly accept the harmful karma, the harmful results, the vipaka, because karma means intentional action. Vipaka means the results of that intentional action. You do it willingly to help. That is a controversial interpretation, but I think it has some merit. That there are places where you just have to take that on. That was kind of what the Cambodian lay people were doing at the temple in New Carrollton, Maryland, when Ongmin Chandawana and I were up in Montreal, and they brought in the exterminator to take care of the roaches. They were taking on, and they actually told me that because I brought up this issue, and they're not Mahayanists, but they were, taking on, okay, we'll take the responsibility for it, but we've got to get rid of the roaches. Especially since they were in the kitchen and the dresser drawers and just everywhere.
Right. Well, that could have spread disease or been harmful. And in a sense, I suppose that mark in the karmic ledger won't be terribly handicapping when all is said and done.
There are, and this is what makes talking about ethical issues very important and working with the teachings. There are moral conundrums for which I don't have the answer. Now, maybe Avalokiteshvara, as the Bodhisattva of compassion, would have the answer, but I don't have the answer. But Thai endeavored, his movement in Vietnam, called the Third Way, which just wasn't Buddhist because they were able to get some Catholics in on it and a couple of the local indigenous religion people in on it to create a third force. But of course, they got squashed.
Right. Yeah, I would say meditation, lots of people is trying to get liberation to themselves. Mm-hmm. But the side effect is if you harm, you're not getting aggression. So your neighbor will be very peaceful because you are peaceful.
Yeah.
There is a side effect, and the main purpose is to calm yourself first.
You need to calm yourself, and through your actions, spread that around. So what is happening is the Dharma is developing in you, and then through you flowing out into the world.
Yes, just like I give myself a example. Every time I drive to monastery, I'm very aggressive of driving because I need to be on time. But then after a whole day there, the situation, the atmosphere is calm. Nobody get angry at me. Nobody's anything bad or challenge me. When I go home, I got very calm driving back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I drive very carefully and mindfully, I'm not getting anybody to hit me, right? So
that's right.
I let them go ahead, So this is like the purpose to be aggressive, because there's certain agitation, external.
But also before there is violence, one has to do the work before there is violence, or try to do the work before there is. Oh, a cat has got a collar on. Ho, 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 a cone.
This is my son, Richie. He's special needs.
So when I go home in the morning, everybody cut off the road. I would say to inside myself, what the heck of this and that. And then going home, somebody cut off said, okay, let go ahead. And you're in the house and I let you. It's a different attitude within myself.
Yeah.
Even the external condition is the same, but my reaction is different.
Yes, how we respond becomes very, very important.
So I think even the meditation, a lot of people say, I'm going to sit here to this and that, but the side effect is still, it's a good thing, whether you would enter to the jhana or not, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I remember reading years ago, very superficially, of game theory when I was an undergraduate. And the question was, how, if at all, is it possible to foster a relationship of trust and predictability in an environment where there are no rules, no enforcement, no mechanism to control the actions of two players. And ultimately, and this is very high order mathematics that I never really understood, but the summary was the best way to do that, and it can be done, is to cooperate with your adversary on the first move, and thereafter mimic your adversary's last move. And so if the adversary's next move is destructive, then you respond destructively. And if at some point in time the adversary becomes cooperative, then you become cooperative. And eventually the theory is that you would both have an atmosphere of predictability and stability and trust and mutual benefit. And it sounds very much like what we've been discussing here, and that is be the change you want to see. And you mentioned, of course, ethical conundrums relating to such things as conflict and whatnot. It's just very interesting that these lessons not only seep into psychiatry or medicine, as you mentioned, even corporate speak, unfortunately, but also into game theory and higher order mathematics. It's fascinating. This is a way forward on many levels.
Yeah. Well, it's all into is.
It is.
It's fascinating stuff.
I have a story, Michael.
Yeah. What is it?
So in 2011 in Washington, D.C., the Dalai Lama came to do the Kala Chakra teachings, initiation, which was, it was almost 2 full weeks. And so, as you can imagine, there were people from all over the world, thousands of people. It was in the Verizon Center. And there was an outdoor Tibetan market, so there were lots of people around. So this was in July. And I'm sure you know the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, yes.
And so there was a Black man, in the noon sun lying on the stairs. sweating. I don't know if he was, on some substance, but, there's thousands of people walking by, and here he is. And so when I got back from lunch, he was still there, and I just could not believe that with all of these people there, to listen to a Buddhist master, that no one did anything. And so I went up to, there were police cars there, of course, because for crowd control. So I said, this man has to be moved. And so they got him hopefully somewhere else where he wasn't, passed out in the sun. But it was shocking, actually, and disturbing that no one stopped.
That I'm sorry to say doesn't surprise me. Same kind of thing with other situations. I've heard the Dalai Lama speak several times, not at that particular time, but down at Constitution Hall when he first came into DC, and at American University a couple times when I had the benefit of his speaking in the gymnasium, which was just not far from my office. And you get these crowds, and there's some jostling and a little bit of pushing and shoving, which is not part of the atmosphere of the moment. And this thing happens elsewhere. There are, in other religions, every now in the news, there'll be some great festival, say perhaps somewhere in India or Saudi Arabia, whatever. And X number of people die because something has triggered a stampede or a pushing and a shoving, and they just walk right over them because they're not really paying attention. They're not living what they're there for, what it's about. And that's why it becomes very, very important, I think, to do, in addition to one's formal practice on the cushion, on the chair, on the seiza bench, but also I keep pushing this little book by Jan Chosen Bays, stitch it into your everyday life by doing things like this. For example, there's one way.
Michael, we can't see because your ground is blurry. Can you bring the book closer? Mindfulness of what?
On the go.
Yeah.
No, too close.
On the go. There you go.
Okay. On the go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's put out by Shambhala. And for example, one thing you could do to develop mindfulness, and this is initially it was done by John Kabat-Zinn with a raisin, but then my friend Dennis Shaw, who lives here at Homewood, did it in prison using a M&M peanut.
Yeah.
So when you have an M&M peanut, peanut M&Ms, what do people do with them? Chung, 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 chung. And the bag is gone real fast.
Yeah.
Take that M&M peanut and just feel it. Feel the texture, the smooth outer shell. Then with great self-discipline, put it in your mouth and don't crunch it, but just lick it and notice the feeling on the sensation. Then as the sugar shell dissolves, notice the change in the texture to the chocolate, which is not a very high grade chocolate, but notice the texture, the change of the chocolate. Then again, notice that change when it gets down to the peanut. And again, how much rougher it is than the chocolate and not smooth and melting like the chocolate. And then as you crunch it, it is a really wonderful exercise in mindfulness. And you just do little things like that. Or when,
I'm hungry now. That's right. That's a great description.
Anyhow, it works.
It
was done as an exercise. I've done that exercise. Dennis did it in the prison, and the guys really got a message from it. Then I did it when doing a talk on Buddhism at the Unitarian Church, itty bitty teeny weeny Unitarian Church here in Trumpland. And the people loved it because they really slow down and they can develop mindfulness in a fun kind of way with all kinds of little things you can do to that. I was talking about a walking meditation that is kind of different. It's not so focused because you can't walk along the sidewalks in a real focused way, but you can get some degree of concentration. And it's something you can just slip into and then out of as you need to, but just little things, stitch it into the daily practice.
I want to give my example. See,
Yeah,
I try to do that when I brush my teeth.
uh-huh.
I use my electrical brush and I start from one corner and move in exactly the same way every day. So my thoughts don't go somewhere else. I just stay with it for at least for 2 minutes. I do that. So that's it.
Wonderful. I also use an electric toothbrush, a bronze
They're
toothbrush.
better that way. Yeah, they don't hurt your gums.
They don't.
That's right.
And I do the same thing because it's designed to do one quadrant, another quadrant, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes. And you can feel the sensation. Also when it goes from the tooth to the gum and along the edge of the tooth and around like that. So there's little things you can do in your day like that that make it really important.
As you said, every moment of a typical day, getting up, feeling the bed, using the bathroom, washing dishes is an opportunity to be mindful. You don't have to get on the cushion, get on the couch, assume the lotus position and take off for a while. You can do it as you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah, exactly. And again, on the another talk, I quoted the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the root text for all Buddhist meditation. And in it, the Buddha said, in that one particular paragraph, the Buddha says, whether you're standing or sitting or even goes on, defecating, etc., mindful. You get this in much later, over in Japan, in the 13th century with Dogen Zenji, who founded the Soto Zen tradition in Japan. And he had outlined for his monks in the monastery Eheji the same thing. Everything they do is almost ritualistic because it's a moment for mindfulness, even when they're in the toilet, whether they're in the kitchen, etc. It's a tremendous amount of focusing. And again, the everyday practice and the formal practice they go together and they make a whole.
And it's not possible to do if you multitask. You can, I don't know how to say it. You can't concentrate in one thing while you're doing something else, because I tend to just stop and stand, just watch the thought process going. Then I see myself, I stopped what I was doing. So
your mind is really going back and forth. Your mind is going back and forth. And
but the modern society now rushing everybody, they are helping everybody doing multitask at the same time, so we can get more things done. So quickly. Yeah.
Some studies I've read
about
indicate that multitasking is less efficient.
Right. Okay. Exactly.
May I shed some light on this? Depends on. Thank you. Multitasking is interesting, or in some ways a false concept. If you're using the same area of the brain, you cannot multitask. You'll go from one task to the other. You can multitask if you're using two different parts of the brain. For example, you can listen to music and drive. You can do both things at the same time, but you cannot read two books at the same time, as an example. So multitasking, it depends on the task that you're doing and which part of your brain you're using.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Thank you.
What is it called?
Multitasking.
Multitasking work is not working too good anytime, anywhere, because it's disturbing your main purposes. That's what I would say. Especially like now, I can always say during the driving, I see a lot of people put the cell phone in front of the driving driving steering wheel. I think that's very disturbing.
Well, it's very dangerous.
Very dangerous. But they said no cell phone as long as you don't touch them. But what difference does it make? It's just your mind is not on driving. It's on the phone that talking. This is a thing, the multitask, I think, sometime, like Liana say, it can be done, but you cannot sing and reading Buddhist book or something. They were telling me, I listen to the tape from so-and-so, the Bhikkhu and all that when I'm driving. Come on now, don't do that. I mean, you don't learn Buddhist thing and while you're driving. What do you think? Driving or reading? You know, this is a different type of a time to do the multitask. Yes, you can do certain thing nobody around you, let's put it that way. Yeah, you want to be mindful, you better stick with one thing at a time. We already have monkey mind to start with, so we have to
or as a friend of mine called it, popcorn brain.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yes, popcorn brain.
Popcorn
well, someone
brain.
should invent an electronic countermeasure for installation in cars that disables or jams all electronic devices for the duration of their presence in the car, unless it's a feature of the car itself, and then the problem is solved.
Yeah, we always talk about, like Analayo, Bhikkhu Analayo always say, mindfulness. And I keep asking him, what is mindfulness? He said, concentrate in one point. You cannot, my mind is still floating no matter what. It's very difficult to be just one-pointed mindfulness.
I see Larry is mindful of the bell. He's got it there. Captain America is about ready to ding ding.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just trying to be gentle here.
Yeah.
Practicing patience.
Yeah.
Holding up the bell.
I mean,
the bell, and then
part of it is you very rarely get a chance to get together and just discuss things like this.
Before we do the bell, I'll share an insight I've gained over these 3 sessions with you, Michael, and that is my first introduction to mindfulness occurred and I didn't even know it. I was 12 years old. I had a newspaper route in my neighborhood. It's a morning newspaper, 35 customers around a couple of blocks near my house. I would get up at 5 o'clock every morning and deliver it on foot, just walking from yard to yard, put it in people's storm doors or mailboxes. And it was dark and it was silent and I was all by myself. And I did that every day till I graduated high school, 5 years. And it was a very special time because I could smell the air. I could see the stars. I could feel the rain. And it was my time. And it was utterly silent and very relaxing and focusing in a sense. I guess that was a mindfulness even before it was a term that we knew of here, at least. And I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
It was.
Yeah. Okay, Larry, you're on.
Everybody enjoy Michael's surprise topic, so you should come every year, okay? Don't give me any excuses.
Yeah.
The last one.
This commercial has been brought to you by Faye.
Yes. Okay, Michael. I mean, Larry.
3 bows to the Buddha. Bow to the teacher.
And the participants.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you,
everybody.
See you
Tomorrow
tomorrow.
On
Bye.
time.
Yeah.
Thank you for making it accessible to us.
Happy 4th.
Yes, you too.
Happy 4th of July.